Can you guys look into the matrix yet? Do you recognize what's in the scripts here? Back in 2013, when I was learning it, I was very frustrated with the resources that were out there. And it took me days to learn something that really should have taken me like half an hour at the most. Hold you close to the morning, turn just to stay alive. Just to stay alive. It's a way I ride like the thoughts of a man who lies. To start of the new day's bright. This is just true in general of startups. A lot of people want to build something and then have people like it rather than want to look at what the market wants and then go build that. It's like they reverse the concept. Okay, well, I had this cool idea on how to build it and then we'll see what it market. That happens in Bitcoin a lot. You can kind of see that with a lot of features that end up coming through, even the tech coordinates and possible and so on. Sounds cool or it's conceptually interesting. Therefore, this is what I should be building. Almost never works that way. It's the best products are almost accidental, and you're almost flooded with demand, right? You go and make instead of like making something and then trying to market it, you find people are asking you to build you something, and you go and build it, and it's like, oh, they've had a friend that also wants the same thing, and they had another friend that wants the same thing, and that's at least for me. I've worked at like 13 startups. I'm like a startup veteran from like the .com days, right? So I'll pull that. Almost everything where somebody tries to make a product and then market it versus, sort of like in demand that's almost organic. The organic thing with everything. And the two companies where I had an exit by doing an IPO in the public market, they both ended up that way. One was Athena Health. I don't know if you know about that company. But I was there before we went forward. The company started initially as a way to manage overreaching, and they found this huge pain point where they couldn't get paid on their billing, right? Like trying to figure out how to deal with all the insurance people. So one of the founders hired his brother to go fix it, and he did a pretty good job. And then every other region in the area wanted the same thing because that was their pain point, and then that became it was almost accidental. They didn't want to do that. So that would be the big mistake that I think most founders make, especially early stage, is trying to build something that you want and then see if you can market it. Like almost always that's a mistake. Go listen to the market first. That almost always gets you better data. Would you necessarily say it's easier to see what's out there in the Bitcoin space and then see if there's a need for it if they don't have product market fit from the beginning, or should they just go and start working for a Bitcoin company as a good first option to learn from other builders, other people that have done it? Yeah, for me, if you're going to be building on Bitcoin, I would suggest you go into a completely different industry. Anything on Bitcoin has been built to death. There's already 30 startups that are probably trying to do what you're doing. The big opportunity right now is going into a traditional business and figuring out how to integrate Bitcoin, whether it's in the treasury or like payments or something else. There's usually a strategy that you can integrate Bitcoin in that will make that business significantly more money. But the problem is that like Bitcoiners just want to build Bitcoin stuff when really like the world is your oyster, right? Like there's so many opportunities where if you just figure out a few ways to save money in various processes, you can be their hero. Like first of all, if you're gonna go in there as like a junior programmer, you're not gonna like up into this, right? Like change their business model. You have to sort of like prove yourself there first. The big opportunities are in the intersection between traditional businesses and Bitcoin, and it's those that are not getting exploited at all. Right? Maybe it's because of that hurdle rate and why it's so hard with being a Bitcoin company. You have to speak of parties. You have to beat the purchasing price of Bitcoin. Like, is it because of that? That's a constant thing that we're facing as builders or company in Bitcoin. Yeah, we're in a really weird state, right? For Bitcoiners, they already know what kind of rate is just on Bitcoin. You're usually getting 20% a year. Most years, like this past year, it's like 100%. The year before that, it was 100%. Year before that, it was 100%. Right? It's like that's pretty hard to beat. You're not going to be able to convince a lot of people to part with their Bitcoin for it. So what's happened is that with most Bitcoin businesses, they go out and get money from the show. So they get it from DC, they get it from hedge fund investors, people that don't know that much about Bitcoin. They think, oh, this is my Bitcoin proxy. But then, like, they do the math later, and they're like, I could have just bought Bitcoin. I'd be like way better off. And but you have to realize to get money from an angel or a VC is much lower than from a Bitcoin. And that's kind of the problem, is that you end up playing more API, which is grow really big, show big numbers, lots of customer acquisition, doesn't matter if you're losing money, and then you raise like another round that's bigger. That's the game that you play in sort of like the traditional VC world, where you have to continuously grow and like down around this debt. Right? And so you don't want to, and a lot of Bitcoin companies end up having to play both sides, and it doesn't work out because they're being fed like a slaughterhouse pig, right? With cash injections and stuff like that. And if they're smart, they convert a lot of it into Bitcoin early on, and they can like coast for a while and try to figure out how to market. Largely, like, their VC won't let them or something like that, and then they end up like trying to make something work, and then like they end up like kind of failing. This is the world that we're leaving, which is like fiat and VC money that's just abundant printed money out of nothing. Almost all this they secret about like VC money guys. The LPs that are contributing to your VC fund, they're getting loans on the property that they already know. It's money printed out of nothing. Like when they get their capital calls, they're taking out loans against like their $40 million mansion in the Hamptons. It's not money from their savings. So it's always printed money that's coming into the VC that end up finding its way into startups. Bitcoin is sound money. So to get that off of a Bitcoiner standard, that's like, man, that's going to be really tough because you're going to have to put that where you're going to have opportunities that are so good, that are so compelling, so obvious that people are like, okay, I'll partner with my Bitcoin to do that. But in the meantime, we're in between both stages, and you're not able to get the returns for either one that you expect. You're not profitable enough at the beginning for the second round, which is the Bitcoin round, and you're not growing fast enough for it's a very tough place to be as a Bitcoin builder. And so we've been doing startups with PlebLab, and that was one of the things that I was wrestling with in the very beginning. And I was talking to Nick's team when I was at for G's meetup. He said the same thing too. He's like, "Are you being honest with these founders that are coming in?" And I was like, "Yes, I'm actually wrestling myself because I was at Thomas and Sochi Nakamoto Institute, looking through some of the old documents on there, and they were talking about the same thing that we're talking about now, like the hurdle rate and all that stuff. And so this is the thing that's been on the minds of Bitcoiners for the entire time. This is not a new thing. With that down really fast today. Yeah, it's logical, and you can derive it from first principles. It's a little different when you're a founder, you're running a Bitcoin business, and you can't raise money because you're not going to. But you're going through both ways as Bitcoin business, which is why I'm telling you, like, go to a traditional business, figure out a way to integrate Bitcoin. That's probably the best art way that you have right now as a founder. Because if you do that, then, well, first of all, you can just file all the money that you raise in Bitcoin, right? That gives you a way much longer runway. That gives you more time to go find product market fit and be profitable. very early rather than, like roll it all across with the fiat. So, I mean, it's kind of a weird and tough environment, but if you can figure it out, you can make it a lot. And there's a lot of arbitrage on it. So I wanted to insist some of the filter stuff because I know you have you've been doing a lot of these blogs on your Twitter and stuff. So what's the difference for that? Just in simple terms, like what's going on with people Bitcoin forward and 30, the filter stuff. And what does that mean to the people in the audience that don't understand that? Yeah, I don't know if it means all that much. But I think you explained it really well was as a user of Bitcoin, a whole Bitcoin, we deploy Bitcoin. So as a user of Bitcoin. So the actual thing is that you have something called relay policy that every node, right? These are transactions that you relay to other nodes that you're connected to. And this is basically how transactions propagate through this. And the policy is you you continue relaying certain kinds of transactions and you stop relaying other kinds of transactions. So for example, greater than 100,000 bytes are not relayed. And this is partly because from a network perspective, those are kind of big. And if you have replaced by B on 100,000 bytes, 150,000 bytes transaction, another 150,000 bytes, you can DDoS like nodes that way very easily if they get too big and so on. There are many reasons for different filters on relay. There's a particular field in Bitcoin, there's an output that you can have that's worth exactly 0 cryptocurrencies called op return. And this is a place to sort of like dump random message. And this was done so that, at least early on, so that protocols that were sort of color point based would not be dumping data into the field. And that was the point of doing all of that. And they limited it at first to 40 bytes. Later, they doubled that to 80 bytes. And it stayed more or less around 80 bytes right up until. And the reason why they changed that was because of a project called PlebLab. There's a company called Fitria, which is developing this. And it's a different kind of smart contract platform in the sense that if you're familiar with smart contracts on Ethereum, for example, the entire thing has to be run by every node, which is why they have like 5 nodes, because they want to do all that work. But everybody runs every smart contract. The way PlebLab works is that only the people that are interested run it. And if I can prove that you ran it wrong, then I can take the money, right? Like, so everyone is incentivized to run the smart contract for that plan. Anyway, they are building this entire system and they have the need to, in an emergency, 160 bytes into a single transaction that gets into the blockchain quickly. And they told, they told this to one of the core devs, and they were like, "Oh, well, why aren't you using OpticX? Because it's only device." So instead, we're going to use 5 K2 taproot outputs with 32 bytes each. That would be 160 bytes of 130 data, 5 UTXOs that will never get through. And the developer was like, "Okay, we're going to go through." So they went back to court, they put in a pull request saying, "Okay, let's just remove this limit altogether and delete the option for users to change it." That was the first pull request. With the community up for what you send it, they changed it to, well, we're going to deprecate this feature and we're going to cap it from 80 to 100,000. Like a little bit of an overreaction. They need 160. They're going all the way to 100,000. So that's kind of what happened. And then there was a whole bunch of stuff that happened with Libre Relay and sort of quote unquote proving that filters don't work. There were other there was this whole thing with like below 1 sat for V-byte transactions that were getting to the miners through Libre Relay, so that they added that as part of Core V30, where now the minimum fee rate for a node core relay is now 0.1 sat per V-byte instead of 1. So those are all things that have sort of happened. And there's a lot of uproar because 100,000 bytes is like enough to put in like a short video or audio or picture or whatever, and a lot of people are in an uproar about that. Despite the fact that you could do in-person capitalism. Yeah, that's about the things that are bigger. And so that, and you know, you get to witness this scam, so you don't have to pay as much and so on. So there's a lot of controversy around this, and there's a bunch of people that are just kind of confused what's going on. A lot of forecasters seem very insistent on getting this in and using the option directly. And yeah, I just something smells a little bad. As a user of Bitcoin, somebody, because we just told everybody holds Bitcoin in here. Yeah. So how do they? Well, why should I care? Why do Google this word like? Why did it matter to the end user, to the person that? Well, first of all, it's essentially making it easier for spammers to say. You know, there are other methods. The thing about auth return is that it only requires a single setback. Anything inscription related, you have to use two, unless you're using a control block, but then it has to be like a multiple of 32 and all this other stuff. There are ways to do other things, but the main thing is that you can basically put in you know, random data into auth return. So that prices your transactions out of it, right? The more of those there are. Now, economically, I still think spam is the tolling value of spam will go down again. Right? That's what a lot of that is. But it does sort of complement it, right? It makes it so that your transactions cost more, your Lightning channel cost more, and your Lightning channel closures cost more as a result of that. There's also the fact that there probably won't be more blockchain processes, right? Especially as you get down with the minimum fee being 0.1 sat per gigabyte. If that becomes standard, then like we saw for a while there, the mempool was completely full, and there was like 200 megabytes worth of 1 sat per gigabyte transactions that took a long time to clear. If it was like 0.1, that could be a lot more, right? Like it can be a significant amount, and that's you know, that'll cause like your emptiness to be full, right? That's almost always not that that's necessarily too bad, right? Like, but it would be running faster or more efficiently. You're also using some of your upload bandwidth for a lot of this stuff that you weren't doing before. If you're using a typical ISP, they limit your upload, even if you have like a lot of download, yeah, usually the ratio is like something like 10 to 1. They expect you to upload a lot less than download, and that's part of it. Just to be like, if you're running your own, that's other thing. So those are a few. I mean, I'm sure there's more. I haven't thought through all of the consequences for the end user, but ultimately it comes down to your node is going to be using more resources, and the Bitcoin network is going to be a little more clogged. But those are like the more practical, like what happens to like transactions. The bigger thing for me is, okay, what happens to the consensus process? Because this was pretty much jammed through by, 200 people on the face of massive opposition on Twitter and whatever. If they can do that with Fed, it's possible that they could do that with a consensus process. In which cases, you might have a little on. And then, so is this all happening like this to Version 30? Is that what's going on here? And yeah, so Version 30 is slated to release sometime in October. They already have a release candidate 1 that's out, and it has all of these features. For all filters. Well, so it sets the data carrier size to 100,000. Transactions that have an out return that like a 5,000 bytes with 5. So if you're running a release candidate 1 right now, that's what would happen. If you didn't, you would keep it around, but you would relay. So that's the difference between like relaying and not relaying. But that's yeah. That's big now. So we're what, like 2.5 weeks from October. That's the least from October. So within like a month, we're gonna see the release. So that's going to be like the point at which, okay, do people actually upgrade? Because at least if you analyze from a network perspective, something like 10% of the network is 40/30. Then that's called the percolation threshold, the point at which transactions will be heard by pretty much everyone on the network. Those transactions that they are doing, because it's a very unique network. 10% is not that much. So I think the way Adam Backford said is like the tolerant minority with this. Whether it's more like if you have even a small minority of nodes that will delay as you got that, and there's no role. Basically populate the entire town. You talked about why you're against covenants. I would love to hear it's working that more like on the plain version of what is covenants and like why you're like one of maybe every. Is there anybody else against covenants? Oh, there's a lot. There's a lot of people that's not studied that anyway. It's definitely not the side that everybody chooses, right? Well, so the thing is, if you're for covenants, you have a particular application of mind, so you're very vocal. If there are against covenants, you're not really staying. Oh, interesting. Okay. But the main reason is because what's covenants? Yeah. So what a covenant is, it's locking an output to particular output, right? So a time lock, for example, as a covenant is saying, okay, you're not allowed to spend this particular output until 2030, right? You can make that an output object point. So that's a form of covenant. But what people want is something that's a little more complicated, right? Like a vault would be, okay, you're only allowed this address in 2 different places. It can either go to this exchange or the super multi-sig or something like that. And that's what a covenant is. And you have some of that functionality on Liquid today. Yeah, they enabled a whole bunch of uploads, a lot of simplicity. So there's a lot possible. You can also do it on Bitcoin software. You can do it today by creating transactions off of your ETSO and throwing the private key away, right? And then just keeping the transactions. In fact, a lot of covenants proposals actually work this way, where you have to pre-sign a whole bunch of stuff. You don't throw your private key away, but there's a lot of pre-signing transactions. So it's not anything really out there, right? Or like completely foreign to the covenants people. So you could do that today. As far as I know, like no one uses it. At least at the user level, right? I mean, maybe there's some guy playing with it in like San Francisco or something, right? Like there's probably people doing something with it somewhere. But at the user level, it hasn't come through. It's not something that you see in Sparrow on the foot. Even stuff like time loss. Yeah. Maybe that's often like has some of the movies to it, but that's a recent thing, and it's like I don't know if anyone uses it yet. But even like time loss, very few people actually use it, and I suspect a lot of it is like doesn't good, right? Like how do you get the user to define what the 5 exit points are and that they actually understand what that means, right? And how do you prevent them from shooting themselves in the foot where all 5 of them are really the same exit point, and then no, it's only in an emergency if one of their keys goes away, they lock everything out, right? Like it's an enormous user footprint essentially to enable something like that. But don't we need to still say 8 billion people? Well, first of all, I don't think it's just going to get you there. That's 8 billion people, though. I could get to that later. But confidence is this thing where a lot of people want these toys, right? And I get it. I'm a developer. I like having toys. I like having new primitives. I like having new Lego pieces to build my like tower or whatever. But that's not what Bitcoin is for, right? That's not why you change Bitcoin so that developers can have more toys. You change Bitcoin so that the users get more value out of it, right? You change Bitcoin so that everyone grows wealthier in Bitcoin terms because of whatever feature it is that you're doing. So for me, it just doesn't need that far, right? Like for me, Lightning was good enough where doing some sort of software, some sort of significant upgrade that everyone had coordinated, it was worth it. Covenant, I really don't think so. And I think at this point we can argue that Taproot wasn't worth it either. I mean, we spent years on that stuff. Years. Like enormous amounts of code in Bitcoin code base. And what's it being used for? Ordinal, inscriptions. What the hell? That's not what we signed up for, but that's what it's ended up being because like no one's really built anything compelling, and we sort of did it speculatively instead of, like I was saying in the other part of the talk, actually listening to the market. What users need, what do users want? And as far as I can tell, like there's no big user outside the Covenant, right? Or any Covenant related functionality. Or if there is one, like no one's articulated it well enough where users are clamoring for it. Do you think there's a responsibility to Bitcoin developers and the open source community to think about it, to think about the users? Because and you've touched on this on your blog that, you know, when Taproot and some of these other updates happened, there was, you know, 40 billion and then 50 billion market cap, right? Now we're at a billion. Yeah, so like users' responsibility that maybe we're just not taking seriously. Yeah, or responsibility is the wrong word, maybe. Yeah, developers are developers, right? And I think, especially from like the block side on, I think they were afforded almost like a saintly status that they didn't necessarily deserve. I mean, everyone's human, right? Like, and they have their own motivations, that they have their own interests and so on. And unfortunately, sort of making them into saints, like, was taken a little too seriously, and a lot of people just sort of followed them, like this like the doubts, right? So one of the things that came out in like one of the Taproot postmortems, I guess, like reviewing, okay, what happened here, especially with like the Bit9 controversy. I think people wanted to figure out what happened and what went wrong and so on. One of the things that came out was that there were a lot of developers that were like, okay, why are you doing this? I don't want to be like the blind, and I don't have a big voice in this thing, so I'm just not gonna like object. There were a lot of developers like that. Not necessarily, they weren't like they didn't have the personality to like speak out and like be loud about it. And, yeah, I mean, these are people that you work with, the people that are doing your code review and stuff. But they're like, you know what, I'm not gonna say anything. I think for a bunch of them, like afterwards, they were like, yeah, I kind of finished it. Yeah, this thing was kind of complicated. Yeah, we understood what they were trying to do, but it wasn't like they weren't convinced that it was ultimately going to end up with like a good feature for the user. And that was a mistake that I think that was made. Do you think we're forward that same trend now again, or do you think it's changed a little bit? Yeah, well, there's no real soft fork on the horizon. Maybe like 264 has a chance. I don't know. That's like that time warp attack that Matt Colello and that Dark Dealer guy, I think the author, like even that, it's like, and it requires the software, but it's like such a remote and small bug that like you really want to spend that much cost on that. It's like it's something like. So I'm of the opinion that Bitcoin is pretty much occupied at this point in terms of features like that. Unless it's like person power. There's a market cap that's too big, and the utility is so great already that it's like, okay, we're using this thing as a store of value. It's doing that use case almost at all costs over anything else. Because if you screw that up by introducing a new feature, it's over. And I don't think there's any appetite for that kind of risk, especially because there are lots of players. As soon as they find out something that threatens the use case or anything like that, they realize no. And it's only going to get worse as the market cap grows. And this is sort of the nature of consensus systems, is that it's relatively easy to get consensus when you have a small group. But as the room gets larger, it gets harder and harder. And that's kind of a feature out of us, because you're all stakeholders, right? All of you that own it, you're a stakeholder, and you have a say. And so let's talk about why you brought up an interesting point about not worrying about scaling people. And tell us why that's like a utopian dream. I really love that you said that. Because it's true. It happens organically. Yes. It has to come from the ground up. And then guess what happens? And then it sprouts out. And there's this thing that happens somewhere else. And it's organic as well. And you see that from the plebs doing that organic. So I love that you mentioned that, and you just talk about why not worrying about scaling people. It's the excuse that people give for central, and it's very much from the get-go. We have to solve world hunger. Therefore, we have to have this government program, right? And it's kind of like that. Any thought work, any big thing requires a tremendous amount of work, and especially in a consensus system, it's extremely difficult. Right? Like the last two summits we went through were very contentious, took a very long time. And I think that was a good thing, right? It needs to go through that kind of. But what a lot of people want is a pet feature to come in so that they can have more choice and some really develop it. And instead of like building something ahead of them, the thing that like upsets me about a lot of these people that are saying, okay, we need this upload or we're not gonna go and scale to 8 billion. And okay, then show me how you're gonna do it. Right? Go build some common thing that's actually gonna scale. And that's going to help. And I give credit to people like the art people, right? Like, you know, it was thought that you needed some sort of common outcome to be able to do art, but they figured out a way to do it without it. And they're like, okay, now we're gonna build it, and we're just gonna get it out there, and we're gonna prove to you that this is going to be very useful for all. And we don't need centralized coordination or consensus changes in order to make this happen. I expect that a lot more than, hey, we need this right now. It's kind of like a subtle threat. It's like, okay, if you don't give me what I want, we're not going to go where we need to do something like that. I just think that's a bullshit. It's most of the time people saying that want to, like people scaring you in some way is a propaganda, right? You see this in climate change all the time. If you don't do this particular policy action, then we're all gonna be underwater in 5 years, right? Like that. And or if we don't go and invade this country, then they're going to nuke us to death, right? Like it's a common tactic. And that's what we're not going to then pinpoint as a failed project if you don't get this in. That's essentially the argument, and that's what I end up with. All right, so I want to go too much of your time before we get to questions, but let's switch gears to the C sheet and some of the stuff that you've been doing for a long time. You taught a lot of people in Bitcoin. Some of them Nostr. What's one thing that you see as a common, just like, I don't know, just like one of those things that either you see time and time again that it is either like a thing that surprises you when you're teaching or something that you're just like, wow, or like something that just wows you or moves you in a way where you're just like, wow, that was a cool experience. I didn't see that happening. Or, well, for me with teaching, and I'm sure all of you have this experience where high school, boring as shit, right? Like it's just like there's some subject that you're not interested in. Maybe it's English literature, maybe it's social studies, maybe it's gym, whatever, right? It's boring. You have no interest in it. And the teacher is just trying so hard to like keep your attention, or he or she's a bad teacher. That was my impression of teaching, right? Because even in college, like a lot of kids just don't care, or they only care about the grade, and it's like not the subject at all. And you know that was my experience actually even teaching at DC is that all the students they just want a good grade. it's not material at all. What's really cool about teaching Bitcoiners that are motivated to learn Bitcoin, I think actually learn material. And as a teacher, that is about the best experience to have. Is teaching people that want to learn what you want to teach them. And that's what's wrong with the education system. You have people that are teaching oftentimes that don't care about their subject to people that don't care about the subject, right? What do you think is going to happen? It's going to be a disaster. But when you have a teaching environment where people want to learn what you're teaching them, and it's a beautiful experience. And seeing them, and I kind of want to see it's really exhausting. But every single part afterwards, it's like, thank you, sir. And that was I got to really understand this, and it's something that I'm passionate about. You really want it. That to me is what teachers. I'm so sad that most teachers in the world don't experience that because they're teaching in a classes. What's one of the things that you've seen teaching where you're just maybe it's more like maybe you're surprised somebody came in and they had like really little experience in programming or one thing or another. You're able to get that to a type of release and they shock you. Well, actually, they shock me because they have a lot of insight into what they're doing that I don't at all. When I started teaching that class, it was I expected it mostly to be programmer, the early to mid career, I had this one guy that was an accountant that was like 70. And he took my class. I was like, what the hell are you doing? I'm advising this group on tax payments to understand how this whole thing works. And like a few months later, he wrote me back. He's like, okay, because I took your class, I understand how platforms work. So now I can see, I know how to treat a Bitcoin tax work. Like how to whether that's income or capital gains or something else. Like, because I can make the argument because I understand the technology. See, you get stuff like that where just like random people show up and they have their own motivations for learning that you never would have thought of. And this is, in general about building too. A lot of your customers, you're going to aim at a particular group, but you're going to find that you accidentally hit people that you never expected. The customer that you never expected to have. And you need to pay attention to them. Because oftentimes those are what I'm talking about. Because they often don't have like the same price sensitivity, or they're so desperate to get the knowledge or whatever your product is, and you never even thought of it. But they're willing to pay for it, right? You need to pay attention to those signals because those are oftentimes the most popular. Okay, got two more. These are really quick ones. Give us one unpopular Bitcoin safety is equal HL in future. We're not going to have any more software. Really? Good. Oh, okay. And then, here's a good one. What's a failure that you've experienced as a builder that you're grateful for? Because it maybe grew to or something, but not that it's good. Okay. I'm on the Bitcoin platform, and I have been studying the elliptic curve cryptography. So I was like, Bitcoin uses it for signing and verification, and I understood elliptic curve cryptography enough to know that you can do the reverse, where you can encrypt something. I found out later there was something called ECIS, which did exactly the same thing. But I was like, I could develop this. So I came up with this protocol. I was really excited. I went on the Bitcoin platform, and it was like new ideas or something. It was moderated by Greg Maxwell, and I posted on there. I didn't know who Greg Maxwell was. I posted on there, and Greg replied, and he's like, okay, well, I'm citing a couple of other people. Because, they're like, I understand you're done, blah, blah, blah. And tagged a couple of other people to evaluate what I had written on, And those two people were Lucas Jr. and Andrew Boca. Luke Jr. and I didn't know either of them at the time. I had no idea who they are. And they started telling me everything that was wrong with my application, like the physical and Luke in particular was particularly vicious. And I ended up like getting into this very heated argument with them. Guy is right, and at some point I was like, I'm tired of this. I needed to. And and then like as I got more into the industry and so on, I think it was maybe like 6 months later. There was I think the Texas Bitcoin. Oh, the one that what's his name? Yeah. Bitcoin? Yeah. So that was the first one, and I actually met Booth. Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, he came down for that, and I was like, I just wanted to, we haven't met in person, but we did meet offline. And I'm sorry for what I said, or whatever. And he's like, don't worry about it. I don't remember it. Like, he did lesson for me because, like, we kind of, I was that guy, I knew the Bitcoin guy at the success. And that's an instinct that most people have coming into it. And I think that episode taught me like you gotta be like it. Like and like whatever Williams said, and I thought it was sort of like ECI is. Right? It's like a cool encryption method of like now you can like message people that have already spent their with using their public key, and you can embed it on chain, and then they can read the message and all that stuff. And they were destroying it for now. I recognize it as like for reasons, right? Like it's like that's a really stupid idea, right? And like you can keep loading the blockchain with private messages to people that you're trying to communicate with. But I was like, like doing that with Snowden, and like you would be able to read it, but nobody else, and all this other stuff. Of course, now we got Nostr, and it's like way better, and at least a lot of us ideas. But I had a lot of pride about my thing. And this is something that I think as a builder that it's very easy to get into is like falling in love with your own stuff, right? Like loving the smell of your own shit. Like as I said, it's like you have to be able to see things like that and think criticism, because if you don't, it's gonna bite. And this is honestly like the problem with a lot of all like and how it still thinks that you can still smell shit. Yeah, that's how that's how that can happen. Secure things that's why it's so healthy to be around other builders. Come up with things like this, you can get feedback and hear from your fellow builders. We're gonna open up the questions if anybody has any questions. Yeah, go ahead.
This is tie a couple of things together between the opportunity debate and dire warnings about terrible things happening and how we have to adjust or not adjust to accommodate those fears. The latest thing is that, the opportunity change, of course, is going to bring CSAM and malware. So it's going to take, all these scanning tools, and it'll take like cloud nodes down from this season not. What do you think about those dire warnings?
I think that's okay. I'm like, the child point thing has been like a part of the Bitcoin thing since the beginning of it. So hasn't happened up until now. Not to say that it can't happen, but this isn't going to be the vector that's open that particularly. Never mind that it's going to be. I don't really count that as like a I mean, it's possible, I guess, but to me, it doesn't pass the smell test the same way that going up to 100,000 bytes doesn't pass.
And so help me understand, because you probably know a little better, but the claim is that the 100,000 bytes is a contiguous block. Is that true or not? It is. Because the way that I understand it is that consensus level rule is you cannot have a hub be larger than 10 core. So that would necessitate every operator to be its own hub, its own strict hub field, which means you're liable for the 10,000 byte limit, or if an invalid transaction will be able to mine. So that means by definition, the operator would have to be split up into 9 less than 10 KB chunks to be in one transaction. and therefore it's not going to configure the block. And the argument is that CSAM videos and pictures are going to get stuck in the chain and take off cloud.
Yeah, I don't. Well, first of all of that is just binary data, right? And it's somewhere on there, but unless you're a programmer and know how to restrict it, it's more or less just binary.
Yeah.
And that, I think, true for the vast majority of people, unless you happen to know how to extract it. Whether it's divvied up or configured, it's still, you need some software, some knowledge. So I don't know if that argument would necessarily hold up in court or whatever. That's the U.S. government can't, because the whole thing is like on somebody else's computer. I don't think you can or anything like that. Or you get down if they want to do it. They have plenty of other. About that kind of thing. That's everything, which is you book, the little Bitcoin book. You got to thank God for Bitcoin and then program it Bitcoin. Next question. Uh-huh. And mine is struggling to use a lot. Network. Where do you see mining? Oh, there's a lot of questions there. First, Bitcoin blocks not being full. There's always flood in either direction. When it's full, it's like, they don't always store and move it in. Well, that just sort of indicates demand for Bitcoin. We'll see what that goes. Hopefully, it continues to go this year, but it's entirely possible. But yeah, after you've been in it a while, it's controlling. So watch my people, watch my gen. Really, other users go, just sort of sit back. Now, as far as payment network, I think the Bitcoin payment network is good. There's a stat from Elizabeth Stark that I learned recently. 4 years ago, we were doing about $10 million of lending at fixed trading. Currently, we're doing $10 billion. That's 1,000x in 4 years. 3 years. Now, a lot of people are like, oh, but, we're not using it for coffee payments down the street, and, how come and not everyone's taking it? It's like, okay, you're just like a little fee. 1,000x in 4 years, by any objective standard, pretty amazing. And if we get another 1,000x from here, that's pretty much like something like 30% of all transactions in the U.S. It's like an insane number. Well, if you're good for January, I don't think you need to, speed up the escapade or something like that, right? You just have to wait and let it be, and it'll roll on its own. But people see the utility. The knowledge about the mining network, all of the benefits and things like that, don't go and spread isn't that. And oftentimes people need to see it to use it, and users to get used to it and all that stuff. And merchants need to see the benefits and all that. And there are lots of opportunities though. Then it's up to the entrepreneurs to, make that happen. Like I said, if you can roll into a traditional business and integrate Bitcoin into it, you probably have significant advantage over the competitors. That's where there's a big arbitrage on. And I think that's how a lot of this stuff happens. I've seen companies that are sort of like routing into accepting Bitcoin, and then like a month later they're like, no, they don't take Bitcoin to those businesses. That's much easier path of Bitcoin adoption in payment terms than to try to convert all these fiat people that have been making a profit already. They don't feel the need for it. So it is happening, it is going to happen, and it is actually up to many to go and doing some of this stuff. Ask them, some people, right, for them. At some point, that's really important. It is still not, it is, you know, for the idea, I just was about yeah, so then you have giant centralized silos where there's like a large amount of Bitcoin. And as soon as you have sort of a trusted relationship, fractional reserve banking becomes a very tempting possibility. Now, what has happened in the past with gold, that happened a lot with gold, is that there would be a run on the bank. As soon as people thought this place was insolvent, everyone would freak it out. And that place would go bankrupt. Some people would use their money. Usually the people at the end of the line, right? The people that were last decided to come in and get it. Happened in 2012, they just like gave everyone a full haircut instead of whoever is last in line gets uses everything. But that was a comment, and it's a fear. Those are self-correcting. Because as soon as you have that giant centralized entity and they do issue paper Bitcoin or something like that, the withdrawal mechanism on chain, right, like self-custody, that's what will cause them big. And there's no real bailout if you can't pay. That's why a lot of central banks that so specifically was a way to auto bail out a lot of these fractional reserve banks and sort of codify fractional reserve banks. So I don't think that's necessarily a problem. And the solution is that people learn over time to self-custody. And like as far as scalability, well, that will come. And there are other methods of self-custody than having an EPSO on thing that will get developed. I mean, one possible solution. I can't imagine the space of all custody. So I don't know exactly what people are going to do. You know, if it be the debate chain or something else. And the key is that it has to work for the user. If it's not for the user, then I use it. But you know, in a scenario where you're about to lose all your money, you come to a people and you're willing to learn how to be seen, and really honestly, you need some of those crises for people to work. I actually have a very similar question, but I think you kind of answered it. But I have another question. You talked about, okay, no one's outsourced. So, I have two-part questions. I think that we're using the protocol that is in, and it's the age of the that where we need to take the protocol and deliver it and use it. So that, so one, you agree with that. And two, you talked about like, okay, there's been all these ways to do the governance. There's been all these ways to do both. And I think of these as like the giant areas of Bitcoin that people don't like to think about. Like they can put free sign and how we say that's but then how do we have a business or a trust model, right? So one, there's a type of assets. And two, do you think that these dark areas are still worth exploring? Or should I still catch up with where the art guys are at and build off the winner? Then, yeah, oh, good question. Is it the time for that? I think it's been for a while. The user experience around a lot of apps suck. It used to be a lot better. But, you know, unfortunately, like, there's a lot of fiat money going into ideas that aren't necessarily that great. Yeah, you kind of have to deal with that, right? It would be more the age of Apple if we were more on a sound money standard and sort of gauge what people actually wanted. Right now, people are very distracted and they don't like sense it's, yeah, they're not, and a lot of Bitcoiners are already kind of rich already, so they don't have that many needs per se with respect to securing things. So, you know, the age of hackers might not either, but the end of the age of protocol that can do nearby, right? Like, I saw this tweet from the Ben Carter. Oh, he said, you know, what sucks about Bitcoin is that there's nothing to do. And he's kind of right? Like, you just hold and he's like, well, he wants to work on covenants or, you know, FATM or whatever the fuck. It's like, well, there's no user demand for it. It's like what the users want is a good savings vehicle, and they already have it. They have all the tools, and so he's like trying to build for people that are already satisfied with the product that they have. And it's like, yeah, I kind of get that, and I suspect this is true of a lot of protocol devs as well, where they're like, okay, well, what else can I do? the age of like the golden software where you get all the glory for writing SegWit or whatever is over. I don't think that age is coming back where you have this like fantastic thing that you've been rallying for or whatever. I don't think that's coming back, but they're still sort of living like, they're sort of fighting the last war in that way, right? Where they're thinking they're as important as that. Honestly, like, I think where Bitcoin needs to be, will be from protocol development standpoint is bug fixes, stability, reduce the attack surface, those sort of things, and maybe even in a software way to do those. But it's not, let's have a brand new functionality that does X, Y, and Z. I don't think those are going to be nearly as popular as, let's say, in use case. The vast majority of people use it for. And it's like, well, if that kind of solves, then, what else is there to do? And that's where like a lot of people are getting into payments and thinking about like different. And yeah, those are fair things to think about, and there's probably a big market there. But this is why I'm saying like the arbitrage is not really a big one. There are a lot of people thinking about stuff. It's in the fiat world where you can bring Bitcoin in. That's the big artifact. Yeah, that's why I think it's so important to do this year here. Is to grab some people that are working at that effective so they can see some of the opportunity that's here working for putting Bitcoin into their startups. Big question. So I got the last book. Yes, go ahead. Well, about the last phase. So we're saying that we want to like more shorts like that, have Bitcoin. But at the same time, we say that Bitcoin is more of anything is for. More than this pen. What do you think about it? Yeah, absolutely. And that's why a lot of people won't know their Bitcoin. I told a story about like spending $100 on the Bitcoin. Cost 1.65 Bitcoin. What do you think? How do you think I feel about that? Are like meals. But the point is that it's the transactional part of Bitcoin is going to fix something because it requires a merchant to do it. It requires them to do it. No, I don't think we're that far from it. And you can see this when you're like using Zapwrite or whatever. There's a lot of merchants that will like add like a fiat tax. So they want this is how the Bitcoin economy evolves. More merchants that are doing it. Again, if you're going to fiat treasury, yeah, huge advantage over your competition. That's how that happens, and not through okay, well, everyone needs to spend it, and we're going to, it's still accept this payment. I think you have to consider some fool not to accept this payment. Spending it, but spending it. I mean, I spend all the time. Don't be like you, but I'm small. But I definitely accept it as payment as well too. So it's you just gotta take spots for this. Any other questions? Yeah. What can people do like? Yeah. So if you're in any kind of finance, the very obvious way is Bitcoin trade. You go into any company, people a significant amount of whatever capital you have in Bitcoin. That's going to be that. Thanks for giving away live speaking message. And I should finish that question. What do you do with the selection when you don't even have Bitcoin? So I think there's a lot of people opting that. It depends on your particular skill set, but surely there's something to it with Bitcoin. The career advice that I've given to a lot of people is whatever you're good at, go do that and add Bitcoin. It's not that different than like the people that went out west. because what it is that. The model used to be go less younger. And the idea was if you stayed where you were, you would have to compete against everybody else that were already there. Like the cobblers that have been making shoes for everybody for like the last 30 years. You're not likely to easily get business off of it. But if you go out west where there are no cobblers, well, you're gonna do a lot better. So whatever it is you're good at, certainly you have some talent. If you have no talent at all, go learn something. Go figure out something that you can do for money. You have some talent, go find your intersection with it. Right? You can go out west. You don't have to be a prospector. You don't have to be a farmer or somebody that's good with weapons or whatever. There was plenty of room for all kinds of people out there. Lawyers, they needed builders, they needed Bitcoin is still the West, right? And there's plenty of room for all kinds of services. The story I like to tell is about Patrick Burns, that over here. Yeah, get on the top. Yeah, there was not that's a different guy, but yeah, very similar. But anyway, I think he started. He's a lawyer, and he started advising Bitcoin startups. I think in 2012. Came out of a mid-tier law school, right? Started advising that, and he started knowing all of the law around Bitcoin. And soon he became like the Bitcoin lawyer. Any Bitcoin startup that did a flow to him, like for advice, because he knew all of the law. Mid-tier law school. And I think he became like lead counsel at Kraken at one point. The point is that whatever skill you have, if you combine it with Bitcoin, there's probably some potent competition. And you can sell to Bitcoin, or you can serve Bitcoin, right? Whatever that tactic might be. And that's probably at the very least a decent intersection for whatever skill you have. Definitely. Yeah, time for one more question before we wrap up. You're the last one. Anybody that didn't ask one yet? That wants to ask one? Oh, Nick, there you go. When are you writing programming with Python? Nostr, because I saw you mention that. Programming and Lightning. So people have been asking me that since like 2018 when I released programming Bitcoin. And here's why I didn't write it. It was because it's photocopy, right? And this is one of my reasons why I think you should occupy the photo. Because back then, PlebLab with Lightning channels were done a certain way. You had to have 2 of 2 easy DSA signatures, multi-sig, and everything else. But Taproot was on the horizon. Schnorr signatures were on the horizon. So they were like, you know what? We're probably going to change this to be music 2 of 2 so that it's a single signature on chain that everyone saves a little money. I was like, okay, but if I write like a programming Lightning thing, then it's going to be obsolete when Taproot comes out. Probably going to take me like a couple of years to write it. So by the time it comes out, it's going to be obsolete. So I didn't write it. And this is kind of the problem. And then they were talking about like ETLCs instead of HTLCs and all this other stuff. So it's like, okay, it's not worth writing if it's going to go off to be like that. And this is the problem with sort of a lot of this stuff. So, for example, if we were to get covenants, and I had a programming Lightning book out right now, and then they have like a covenant software with probably obsolete all of that because you could do Lightning very differently. You probably don't even need like a funding transaction. Just have like a channel open transaction and all that stuff, right? Like, well, all of the setup changes, everything changes, and everything I wrote is just nullified. So, and mass play Bitcoin. Yeah. So that it can, So that's why would you do it in 5 years if the same way? Yeah, I am. If it's still the most popular at L2, and it's entirely about this. That was good too. Yeah. I wanted to write other stuff, and I have like a lot of material like that I haven't released that I probably open source at some point. Yeah. Feel blowing on like. And then, somebody I was having this conversation with somebody about like, they were like, No, we don't really use cycle that much. We don't use that, but if you look at how Lightning actually works, 99% of it is custodial. Oh, I do. It's like, ooh, that's a little bit of a black hole, I think. But it's like, kind of right. Like, do we even need Segwit as password? Do we even need Segwit for Lightning? Instead of have a lot of that. But there was a lot of it was like transaction down the ability and stuff. But, well, it was kind of custodial anyway then. So they thought they were working, everybody learn more about you, pick your blog, find you at the next big conference, all that kind of stuff. Bitcoin.com is the website. DimmySong.substack.com is my newsletter. Song is my handle on X. And I'm on a bunch of other social media platforms that, do look for me, and I post different things to everywhere. I'll stick, yeah. I'll share all other things. I think I posted by different places. I would definitely recommend subscribing to his newsletter because that's where you like get all of the alpha. Because at the very least, you can see where he travels to and keep up with them. That's 4 hours. Thank you again, Jimmy, for doing this. I appreciate you as a friend and for always helping us out. So I appreciate you. Thank you. There, guys, if you guys are hungry, and we'll be here so just a little bit till 9. So the next Bitcoin Donors meetup will be in November.